It is Wednesday, July the 22nd, 104 days until the midterm elections. And tonight, House Republicans are turning up the heat on one of Donald Trump's top perceived political enemies. MS Now has obtained a letter sent by Jim Jordan, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, referring the former special counsel Jack Smith to the Justice Department for criminal charges. Smith has long been a target of Trump. He served as a special prosecutor, you'll remember, who indicted Trump twice back in 2023, including for trying to steal the 2020 election. Jordan's letter to the Department of Justice alleges that the House has, quote, strong evidence, end quote, that Smith, quote, seemingly made willfully and intentionally false statements of material fact that contradict new documents obtained by the committee from the Department of Justice, end quote. Okay, this is where it gets interesting, even for us non-lawyers. The allegation focuses on one particular line of questioning from a closed-door deposition that Jack Smith took part in back in December. It involves whether or not Smith sought search warrants for congressional members' text messages. Now, during the deposition, Smith said that he did not. He only requested something called toll records. Now, toll records, we all have them. They're basically logs of when calls were made. They do not show the content of any messages or communications. They're basically a list of phone numbers, who you called, and I think how long you talked to them. So here's how the exchange in question went. Question: did you seek a search warrant for the content of any text messages from members? Smith: from members? Question: yes. Smith: no, I don't recall that. Question: okay, it was just toll records? Smith: correct. Okay, it goes on. Question: did the toll records that you requested from the senators, did they include the content of the phone calls? Smith: no. Question: did the records that you requested, the toll records from members of Congress, include the content of text messages? Smith: no. Okay. The discrepancy here, according to Jordan's criminal referral, is that the Justice Department produced documents this month that showed that Smith's team did obtain text messages from dozens of lawmakers. But we know where those text messages came from, and it wasn't because Smith sought search warrants. Those text messages were exchanged between lawmakers and the White House. They were preserved as part of Donald Trump's presidential records at the National Archives, which is where Smith's team got them from. The Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, the ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, said that the referral will be, quote, laughed out of court, end quote. Meanwhile, a representative for Jack Smith's team tells MS Now, quote, the House Judiciary Committee's referral to the Department of Justice of our client, Jack Smith, is based on a spurious claim that Mr. Smith provided false testimony during his 8-hour deposition before the House Judiciary Committee. The referral is made not because Mr. Smith made a false statement, which the letter concedes, but because he did not proactively disclose information that was not responsive to a question asked. During his testimony, Mr. Smith provided truthful, responsive answers and candidly discussed his work as special counsel. This referral reflects a chilling eagerness to weaponize the justice system by attacking a career, nonpartisan public servant who faithfully and fearlessly performed his duties by following the facts and the law, end quote. And that is where my legal expertise ends and Barbara McQuaid's begins. So joining us is Barbara McQuaid, the former United States Attorney for Michigan. She's a law professor at the University of Michigan Law School and an MS Now legal analyst. Adam Mockler joins us as well. He's a digital journalist and a political commentator who's built up a following of 2 million subscribers online. And, of course, the reason he's here is that this is only half a legal story. The rest of it is entirely politics. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Barbara, let's start with you. I've read you what I know. Can you tell us what that means?
Yes, I think there is a real disconnect between what Jack Smith said and what the committee is referring to as a criminal investigation. To prove a claim of false statements before Congress, you have to show that a person then and there made a false statement that they knew was false. The question is literally true. What he said, did you use a search warrant to obtain these records? And he says, no, that's accurate. What Jim Jordan says in his letter is that, well, this was deliberately misleading. He answered a literal question, and he answered it literally. The documents, as you point out, that Jack Smith ultimately received came from a request to the National Archives for White House text messages, and they came in that form. And so it does not appear that Jack Smith and his team ever used their own court process to obtain the content of messages from members of Congress. It matters that it's literally a true statement.
Adam Mockler, here's the thing. Donald Trump, people sometimes loosely call people Donald Trump's enemies. Jack Smith's not Donald Trump's enemy. Letitia James not Donald Trump's enemy. He claims that anybody who goes after him on a legal basis is an enemy. He's got perceived enemies. It is, in his world, everybody's an enemy. This is not... Jack Smith had two very thorough indictments that were not pursued as a result of a Supreme Court decision protecting Donald Trump. But they are determined to go after Jack Smith and Letitia James and James Comey and folks like that, largely to put a chill on anyone who would criticize Donald Trump or investigate him.
Yeah, it seems like the Trump admin is desperately trying to pull some sleight of hand to divert people's attention away from the fact that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. He lost it, and he cannot cope with that fact. So 6 years later, he's spreading lies about it, and he escaped any accountability because Jack Smith's case ended up fizzling out after Trump became the president. But Jack Smith had a rock-solid case, and Donald Trump is scared of that. It's funny, Jim Jordan, who sent this request to the DOJ, ended up saying that this was a separation of powers issue. I didn't hear any complaining about the separation of powers when Trump was directly requesting that the DOJ, that Pam Bondi investigate Adam Schiff or Letitia James. I didn't hear any complaining about separation of powers when Trump blew past that 60-day war mark and pushed the war powers resolution aside. There was no separation of powers complaining when Donald Trump placed tariffs on every single country. He has stepped and squashed all over the separation of powers that wouldn't make it okay for anyone else to do it. But as Barbara pointed out, nobody else did that. Jack Smith was just running an investigation into an election that Donald Trump tried to steal from the American people.
Barbara, it is important where evidence comes from, right? Like, this is a real thing. Donald Trump, Jack Smith had a way of getting this information. And by the way, this is important for all of us to know, that one may never get a subpoena against you, against Adam Mockler for his text. But if somebody subpoenas somebody who Adam Mockler was texting with, they may get their hands on that text. The specificity here matters. Jim Jordan is alleging that Jack Smith broke the law. That's very different from Jack Smith using other methods to get the information that he was using as part of his attempt to prosecute Donald Trump.
Absolutely right, because what they're accusing Jack Smith of here is lying to Congress, and he did no such thing. He conceded that he did obtain the toll records of members of Congress, and this is, by the way, a routine step that is done in criminal investigations. Figuring out who is talking to whom is very important when you're trying to put together a conspiracy case. So the fact that he sought those records is in no way improper. In fact, even if he had used search warrants to obtain those records, I'm not sure that would have been improper. Nonetheless, because of this respect for separation of powers, people use a very delicate hand when looking at these things, very similar to the way they look at press records, only as a last resort. But in this case, they did not seek the content of the records of any member of Congress. Instead, what they were looking at is White House records. And these members of Congress put themselves out there by reaching out or communicating with the White House. They then go on to talk about there was no filter team used here. They waived any privilege they might have had by communicating by text message with the White House outside of the scope of their congressional teams.
Adam Mockler, what's the goal here? Donald Trump's unpopular. Every day a new poll comes out and he reaches lower levels of popularity. He's got this war with Iran. He's now talking. I mean, it's unbelievable to me. He's talking about tariffs again. All the things that Americans don't want, even a lot of his supporters don't want. But boy, if you ever cross Donald Trump, particularly if you were a lawyer or a prosecutor of some sort, you are in the crosshairs now, whether it's about mortgages or parking tickets or in this case, Jim Jordan's making it sound like a serious matter about perjury, about lying to Congress. But in fact, it kind of doesn't matter. If you were involved in investigating Donald Trump from being the lowest level FBI agent to being Jack Smith himself, they're coming for you.
Well, you pointed it out perfectly earlier. He's trying to create a chilling effect. We have seen this administration surgically targets any institution that can act as a check on the president, even beyond the separation of powers of Congress and the DOJ and the presidency. There is the fact that Donald Trump has targeted colleges, law firms, as you pointed out. He's attacked media corporations. He's even gone after independent creators. He has this whole website on the whitehouse.gov listing off independent creators on YouTube and online who have gone after him. But these are just people reporting the news. Donald Trump tries to create an atmosphere of fear around anybody who actually wants to act as a democratic check or balance. And I just want to return to this fact. Trump lost the 2020 election. He's trying to relitigate it 6 years later while simultaneously try to rig the midterms via gerrymandering and striking down the Voting Rights Act and pushing to radically gerrymander. And they're just trying to play sleight of hand. It's like a clever way to try to project onto the other side and say, look, the other side is incredibly corrupt. Meanwhile, they are the ones trying to pull the wool over our eyes while they rig this next election.
I will say, though, Barbara, you know, Jack Smith is he was a judge and a lawyer. James Comey is well equipped to handle these things, and John Brennan is well equipped to handle these things, and Tish James is well equipped to handle these things, sort of. Right? I mean, these are lawyers. They know other lawyers. If they have to go to federal court, they can find someone. The average person can't do that. But the chilling effect is the same, right? The idea is if you go after these big, powerful names, the point is we can go after any of you.
Absolutely right. And although, you know, if Jack Smith were to be charged with a crime for this conduct, I have no doubt he would prevail at trial, if not getting this case dismissed with a motion. But just being charged with a crime is a very burdensome thing for anybody. It puts them through the ringer. There is the expense of hiring lawyers. There is the reputational harm of people who casually read this and don't pay attention to the details and believe he did something wrong. There's the emotional toll on oneself and one's family and the distraction from everyday life or one's career. So just being charged alone would be burdensome to anyone, including Jack Smith. But I think you're right. If you know, it's like when you get into prison, you beat up the biggest guy because then everybody's afraid to mess with you. And so if you go after people like Jim Comey or Letitia James or Jack Smith, what are the rest of us supposed to do? I think the idea is you should keep your head down. You should not speak up. You should not complain. You should not criticize the president, because if you do, you could end up just like these other people.